Hello, and welcome to the hashtag Here to Hear Keeping It 100 podcast. My name is Damon Naylor, and I'll be serving as the host. I'm the NAFCM media guru, and I'm joined by my co-host, DG Mon, the president of NAFCM. What's going on, DG?
Hey, Damon, not much, but loving this opportunity to share space with you and our listeners, of course.
Right, as always, as always. Well, you guys know today we have an awesome guest with us, none other than Joe Berriman of Tucson, Arizona. Joseph is the founder of the Crisis Negotiation Team at the University of Arizona, a professor of law at the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law, and a volunteer at the Center for Community Mediation and Facilitation. Without further ado, we're going to bring in our guest, Mr. Joseph. Hello, Joseph, or Joe Berriman, as you said to call you. We're so glad to have you. Welcome to our podcast. I've just given a formal introduction of you. So at this time, if you want to share any additional information, you can do so.
Yeah, thanks, Damon, DG. Happy to be here. I didn't get to hear your intro, but I guess I've made a career in interpersonal communication. It started as an attorney, later became a mediator, kept my wife on her toes, decided to change it up, went into law enforcement, became a sergeant, founded the crisis negotiation team for my police department, became an FBI certified hostage negotiator, eventually started instructing for them for their negotiation school, and also teach as a professor of negotiation and mediation. And in all of that, I learned that interpersonal communication is universal. And all of those different career paths I had were all teaching the same things. And it's ultimately that people want to be understood. And so I've tried to make a career out of that, which maybe helps some of your listeners maybe explain some of why I had the career jumping there. It's all related, although it seems very disjointed.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Well, I know, one of the, I guess, fascinating things that I picked up in reading everything and looking over your information is the fact of you doing hostage negotiation. So what inspired you to pursue that career? And then how does that inform your work with, the things that you're doing now, especially as a volunteer? What just made you go after hostage negotiation?
I found a passion for negotiation in law school, in mediation, a class that we were required to take initially called interviewing, counseling, and negotiation. One of the classes I helped teach at the law school at the University of Arizona now. And that was my first introduction to really what active listening skills were. And I just loved it. It seemed like it unlocked these like superpowers that I didn't know existed before. And kind of stumbled my way into a mediation internship in law school and just absolutely loved it. I loved the problem solving aspect and like the puzzly nature of trying to navigate through these conflicts and all the human emotion that's attached to them, and kind of learning that it was more about that human emotion than it was about fixing the problem. And
Yeah.
it was just fascinating to me. And I went to law school really to go in the FBI. And long story short, my career took a different way. I ended up going and practicing as a attorney mediator instead, and did that for a long time. I mediated over 3,000 cases, but I wanted something different. And I remembered, the reason I went to law school is to go into the FBI, and decided I want to do hostage negotiation because that seemed the most related to mediation. And the University of Arizona Police Department gave me an opportunity to help found their team. They were willing to let me do that. And one of the only places I think that would. And eventually the FBI learned to like my style and asked me to teach at their school too. And over about, gosh, going on 4 years now, we've had a lot of success with our team. We joined the Pima Regional SWAT team as well. I'm one of the supervisors on their team. And DG and I were talking about this earlier. I found fulfillment finally in my life. At the age of 41 now, I finally found a point where I go home feeling fulfilled, and like what I'm doing is meaningful and purposeful. And it took me most of my professional life to get there, but that's kind of what brought me to it.
Right, right. Well, awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. Would you say that's the key to life though, that we're all really searching for? Is that fulfillment and loving what we do, doing what we love? Would you say that is like just optimal, you think, for everybody for the most part?
I think everyone hears those words at a very young age. And I think more experienced people try to convey that to the younger generation. But it just, at least for me, I didn't understand what that meant. And I didn't understand how to find purpose or meaning, especially at the age of like 18 to like 25. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I went to law school, I think, for all the wrong reasons. I went to law school for the prestige and the title. And of course, I went to law school for the money that would follow. And ironically, none of that did. Not really. It wasn't what I thought it was. And I found areas of purpose and meaning in my career. And I started focusing more and more on that. And I started focusing on things like mediation and helping other people find understanding and agreement and empathy. And in that I found my purpose. And it took me most of my career to find it, but that's kind of how I stumbled into this career. So it wasn't, I grew up with all of those teachings from my parents and from mentors, but until I found it myself, I had to do that. I had to take that path. And we were talking about this earlier, but I work 70 to 80-hour weeks. I've gone the last 3 months without a day off, up until this weekend. Had my first real weekend to myself. And there's that famous quote that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that's misleading, because I think if you love what you do, you're going to be working 70 to 80-hour weeks, loving every minute of it. And when I was talking to my Chief Chris Olson at UAPD, he was asking me how I was doing, and I told him, doing great, but I've been working 70 to 80-hour weeks for the last 3 months straight, haven't had a day off. And he kind of like got a little surprised by that. He said, well, how much of it is self-inflicted? I'm like, Chief, all of it's self-inflicted. I love what I'm doing here. I love working for you, and that's why I'm doing it. But yeah, Damon, you nailed it. Like, I think finding purpose and meaning, doing something truly meaningful is, I think, everyone's aspiration, and you got to find it yourself.
Right, right. Well, man, this is very inspiring, the information you're sharing, and I think it resonates with so many people. It's such I guess, a global interest and desire for all of mankind. Now, you kind of touched on the word, or you mentioned the word empathy, and I wanted to ask you about what is tactical empathy? Explain what that is and its importance in conflict de-escalation. That was my first time ever hearing of that.
Oh, I love that you caught that. Yeah. So, I think empathy, first of all, is really well defined by Dr. Brene Brown. She wrote an amazing book that I think is one of the two most critical books for mediators. It's not actually on mediation, but there's two books that I require all my negotiators to read before they even apply to be on the team. If you want to join the SWAT team to be a negotiator, you have to read The House of the Heart, and you have to read Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, a book on Stoicism. As I think empathy and Stoicism are the two philosophies that provide the cornerstone to being a good negotiator. And the same could be said with a good mediator. If you don't have a good foundational understanding of those two things, you can't do it. So I think those two books are the most important books ever written on mediation.
Okay.
And in Atlas of the Heart, Dr. Brene Brown delineates kind of 4 qualities of empathy. The first being perspective taking, being able to take the perspective of another. The second quality is being able to do that without judgment, which is really hard to do because judgment comes out through our tone, through our inflections, through our facial expressions, our body language. So much of human communication is nonverbal. So it's not just the spoken word, it's everything else, which can be up to 55% of our communication is not actually the spoken word. So staying out of judgment is really hard to do. And then identifying the emotions in your counterpart being the third quality. And the fourth one is communicating that understanding back, which is where mediators, earn their paycheck using active listening skills, using all the many active listening skills that we learn as mediators. So those 4 qualities of empathy are how we establish empathy. Now, the difference between that and tactical empathy is with tactical empathy, it's not just empathy being touchy-feely for the sake of it. It's for a purpose. It's for building rapport. So we call it the behavioral change stairway as hostage negotiators. We're using active listening skills to demonstrate empathy in order to build rapport so that we can influence a positive behavioral change. And we call that the behavioral change stairways. We go through each one of those steps. using active listening skills throughout the whole time to demonstrate understanding. And when I say positive behavioral change, what I really mean is de-escalation. We're trying to de-escalate. We're not trying to eliminate emotions. That's impossible, and that's not something we want to do. But we want to get our people that are in crisis back down to a normal functioning level of emotion. And when we say de-escalation, that's what we mean as police officers, as negotiators, as mediators. We're lowering emotionality so that we can increase rationality. And that is tactical empathy.
Awesome, man. I love it. Very, very profound, very profound. I appreciate that. DG, did you have anything you wanted to ask at this time?
Oh, a variety of questions, but
Go ahead.
I'm gonna build on the last thing, de-escalation, because I think that's so important to so many of our members right now. De-escalation is essential for all our members to have a skill set in. And so when I look at your statement about prejudice without prejudice, we work with that you can never be without prejudice. What you need to be is aware of your prejudices so you're aware of how they come out. Because you used a term that said normal level, and I wrote down, well, what's normal? Because what may be normal to someone who looks and sounds like you on, okay, what's emotional, what's intellectual, may not be normal for someone who doesn't. So how do you work with folks to recognize that even the concept normal itself is a prejudicial concept? How do you unpack that with the folks you're training?
So it's normal for them, whatever their normal functioning level is. So we're presuming that, let me put it this way. We have this diagram that's called the emotional teeter-totter at the FBI school that we use. And it just demonstrates that the human brain can't do both high emotionality and high rationality at the same time. It's always in conflict with one another. And so what we're trying to do is lower them back down to their normal functioning level of emotionality to raise their rationality. Now that normal level, just like DG said, is different for everyone. It could be different even for the same person based on the day of the week. It could be different for them if they're impaired. And, you know, spoiler alert, most of the people we deal with in hostage negotiation are also impaired. And there's usually mental health issues that they're self-medicating with either alcohol or narcotics. And on top of that, they're in crisis. There's some triggering event that's brought them to this point that law enforcement's now intervening. So it's a bad day. They are having a bad day. Maybe the worst day of their life when we're meeting them. So the first thing we're trying to do, and really the only thing we're trying to do for most of our engagement with them, is just demonstrate empathy and understanding and see if we can lower their emotionality back to a normal functioning level for them, at least enough so that we can increase rationality to the point where they can solve their own problem. Because unlike the movies, hostage negotiators aren't trying to fix it for them. We're using motivational interviewing skills to see if they can fix their own problem, if they can identify the discrepancies between their current behavior and their goals, and if they can identify how they get to their goal despite their current behavior. And it's not like the movie Negotiator, if you've ever seen that one, where it's just fixing the problem for them. We don't do that. We operate a lot like mediators do. In fact, all of my negotiators on my team are cross-certified as
I,
mediators
I
with the
would
Attorney General's office.
I would underscore so you operate as community mediators too. I've met quite a few mediators that are not as willing to give that control, that decision making to those in conflict.
Yeah.
And I want to underscore what you said. It is a perfect part of what it means to be a community mediator is we don't solve anyone's problem. We try to create a space, a situation where they can, as you said, reach that level of balance so that they can then say, well, what can I do in this situation? How can I turn it around? How can I go forward? So I hear at your heart that community mediator spirit. So I just wanted to underscore it. Sorry, I did only get one question, Joe. So I'm going to go back on.
Yeah, so some of my proudest moments as a negotiator or mediator were in community mediation. So my longest mediation I had, and I've mediated well over 3,000 cases in my career, just in mediation. My longest one was 16 hours. we came to a resolution. I kept on seeing light at the end of the tunnel, right? We do like 3-hour sessions, sometimes some 4-hour sessions, and I always saw light at the end. And I usually don't set that many continuances, but the light was so bright, it was right there, and I could see them trying to find it. It ultimately led to a resolution. But some of my proudest moments as a mediator were in community mediation, and some of the ones where I had to work the hardest. And by the way, for anyone watching this, that these skills don't come naturally to you, man, they do not come naturally to me. Even after 15 years, at the end of even just a 2-hour mediation, I'm physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted. And I kept on watching my mentors, Adam Glazier with the Attorney General's office, Stacey Brady with juvenile court, Chris Medvick with the community mediation and facilitation. It seemed to come so easily for them all the time. It was disheartening for me as a new mediator because it didn't for me. I was exhausted. And it wasn't until about 2 years into my career that I actually mentioned this to Adam Glazier, my frustration that I'm not a natural like he is. And he laughed and he's like, I'm not a natural. I'm always in this mode for your benefit as your mentor. I do it for you.
Right.
But I'm also exhausted when I'm done. And that was the biggest relief for me to ever hear, that there's no such thing as a natural mediator. It takes intention. It takes purpose. And that intention, that purpose, and that level of empathy, if you're doing it sincerely, is exhausting. And so maybe this message found at least one person on your podcast that can hear that. And the imposter, they're in the first couple years of their career and they're having that imposter syndrome going full throttle, and they needed to hear that. Hopefully it helps at least one person, because I wish I heard it in my first 2 years.
Well, it's amazing that you said that, and thank you for sharing it. That you constantly have to work at it. In other words, like you said, it doesn't come natural to even the pros and the experts. And that is I think it will be of some consolation to those who are just starting off feeling that, oh man, I can't do this. Like you said, I'm just not a natural. It's not flowing. I'm not picking up on this easily enough, and it's wearing me out. But as you said, to do it correctly, to do it at the level that it needs to be done, then it takes that work. But thank you for sharing that. Yes, sir. Well, I have one more question, and it's amazing that you kind of touched on it a little bit, but we want to get a little more elaboration from you. How does the philosophy of Stoicism contribute to building trust and rapport?
So I think there's 2 parts to it. The first and most important part is recognizing the need for self-control as a mediator or negotiator. An important part of those 4 qualities of empathy that Dr. Brene Brown delineated is staying out of judgment. And I think that's a big part of Stoicism. You can't influence somebody else's emotions if you can't control your own first. So it has to start with you. And there's this amazing quote from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a survivor of the Holocaust. And he, his wife, and his child were in the Auschwitz internment camp. And he had a tragic backstory. Despite his survival, his wife and daughter died. And he went on to write a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's an entire book about finding purpose in this most horrific way. But he has one quote that just really stood out to me. A quote that I really felt inspired my practice as a mediator and negotiator. And the quotes, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So it's really important in those moments where you have that fight, flight, or freeze response, which you get as a mediator. If you do enough mediation, someone's going to push your buttons. Or as a negotiator, it's every time. In hostage negotiation, they intentionally push your buttons, and they try to see where that line is. You have to be ready for it, and you have to respond with thoughtfulness, with like tactical precision, with your empathy too. Our body wants to go into that amygdala fight, flight, freeze response, where it's just this response without thinking, and it goes back to how our brain's programmed for survival. And you have to resist that. And in that moment between stimulus and response, like Viktor Frankl was trying to say, like, you have to be purposeful with your response. And you have to also know that you're going to be challenged. Like there's going to come a time in your career where it's going to be a challenging mediation or a challenging negotiation. And like DG said, like you do have bias. Everyone has bias, some more than others, but that bias will be challenged one day. And you still have to maintain impartiality. You still have to maintain that the parties are the ones that have self-determination. Like you still can't take sides, even in those cases. And I think the philosophy of Stoicism is what's going to help most negotiators through that. There's another famous quote from Marcus Aurelius that also is so profound, I actually wear it on a medallion around my neck. And it's the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And that quote is, you heard the book I recommended by Ryan Holiday earlier called The Obstacle is the Way. That's essentially a summary of that quote, the obstacle is the way. And in fact, it's such a, I think, popular philosophy that it even exists in pop culture. Like everyone has seen The Mandalorian, right? The TV show. Like, what's his quote that he says all the time in the show? Do you remember?
I can't remember right off.
This is the way, and it's a reference to Marcus Aurelius's "The obstacle is the way." It's the idea that you know you're going to face hardship. You're not going to be defined when the moments are easy, when you win, when you have success. You as a person are going to be defined when it's hard, when you're faced with failure, when you have some kind of obstacle in your way. That's where you're defined as a mediator or as a negotiator. Not the easy ones, but the hard ones. And so I think you have to go in with this philosophy that in those moments where your biases, your prejudices are being challenged, where your patience and your own emotionality is being challenged, those are really what define a great mediator from just a good one.
Man. Profound. Well, we certainly appreciate you, Joe. It's been wonderful.
I thank you guys. Thank you for putting this podcast together. It's so wonderful to listen to all these mediators come together, and there's not many like it.
You did a brilliant job, very enlightening and uplifting, man, inspirational. So we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, working those 80-hour weeks to be with us. It's been awesome. And, we look forward to keeping up in touch with you and possibly doing another episode. But thanks for sharing the wisdom and insight and your experiences from the heart. We thank you, man, and appreciate you for, as we say, keeping it 100. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll be in touch with you, but we appreciate you.
Great. Thank you, guys.